Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe. Today I'm going to be going over my reasons for why I don't really have a good relationship with the Peter Jackson movies, or at least the first two, 20 years on after the release of these films. What's funny is that at the time when the movies were produced and made, I found them confusing, boring, and just needless. That was my sentiments as a kid. Now, bear in mind, I didn't really fully understand the movies. I did end up reading in 2002 The Hobbit when I was 11 years old. Started to develop an understanding of Tolkien's literature to a limited extent, only insofar as The Hobbit was concerned. To my child brain, it was, oh, these are poorly shot and poorly executed, and the only scenes I could stay awake for were those of Sean Bean and Christopher Lee. 20 years on, they're the only scenes I could stay awake for, along with Samwise, because the actor who did Sam was really good. My reasons for disliking these movies can be broken down into a couple of main ones and a lot of minor ones. The main points are that I find them very weird and miscast. Almost every role is miscast, so that I'm utterly flabbergasted at a lot of casting decisions, as said. There's also mixed with that the direction, which I found very poor, because I'm not a big fan of Peter Jackson's direction. You don't have to agree with me. It just strikes me that he took the stories of Tolkien, which is essentially mythology, and turned it into a cheap action adventure story, which anyone could have made. He essentially Michael Bay washed them, at least in my opinion, and drained them of the beauty and intelligence in a lot of cases. Not all. There are some shots where he clearly got it. No one could have done that good a job, I would argue. You look at the large Argonath statues, Jackson nailed. The design of a lot of stuff was perfect. He obviously had a good eye for design. The costumes were good, so he had a good eye for that. While I don't think he was a very good director, I do think he did get a few things right, and he did have an understanding of the visuals of how this should look. And I would even argue the prologue, he really understood how to get that right. Having Galadriel, played by Cate Blanchett, use her masterful, beautiful voice to essentially retell the story of the War of the Last Alliance and the death of Sauron. So in that regard, he did a good job, even a great job there. I do attribute that to him because, he directed that scene. I still would have liked there to be reference to Gil-galad. There was a way to slip Gil-galad in. How it could have worked, I'll get to later on in the video. And that leads me to point number 2, the lore inaccuracies and the general tossing out the window of the lore because, it's inconvenient. Little details like Frodo's love for mushrooms, for example, being tossed out. I really didn't like that because the point of his love for mushrooms is to help humanize Frodo. And it seemed like it was the mission of the movies not to humanize him, not to make Frodo likable like he is in the book. I do think it was a deliberate decision made by the studio and by Peter Jackson because they weren't really interested in Frodo as a character. And this pains me and annoys me quite a bit. Tied in with that is there's none of the music of Middle-earth, like the songs. And I know some people may not like the idea of the characters breaking a song, but I think that was crucial. The Song of Gil-galad, for example, could have been used as, a semi-flashback thing where you have Samwise singing the Song of Gil-galad as we visually see Gil-galad riding into Mordor at the head of his host and his passing, which this sort of thing would have been great visually. But, he wasn't interested in Gil-galad. Now that I've got the big stuff out of the way, it's honestly tied in with what I said about the movies just boring me. The music I never really liked, because after movies like Dragon Slayer, Dragonheart, Conan the Barbarian, Kull the Conqueror, even TV series like Hercules, even Xena, had great soundtracks. This movie, a very plain fantasy soundtrack in my opinion. I found that it lulled me to sleep as a kid, and I can't forgive it to an extent, because for me, it drove me away from Lord of the Rings for 15 years because I'd look at it and I'd go, ooh, I'm not reading that. That's a terrible story. I don't want to read that. I don't even want to touch that. And it's not until I was 26 when one of my friends said, oh, no, the movies are nothing like the books. Contrary to everyone else who had told me, they're just like each other. Okay, I'm going to read The Lord of the Rings, and I'm not going to like it because, I didn't like the movie. Then I fell in love with the book. Wow, this is a perfect novel. While I feel resentful of the fact that it drove me away from Tolkien for 15 years, because I would have loved to have grown up with him on my bookshelf, on the other hand, I noticed that most people got into Tolkien through the Peter Jackson movies, which I actually think is a beautiful thing. So I got mixed feelings on that front. I feel resentful, but I'm very glad that the movies are the entry for a lot of people. And I think that there's a lot to be grateful in that regard. And so my resentment is kind of blunted by this strange gratitude and affection for the fact that the movies are a gateway for a lot of people. That said, as to the casting decisions, oh boy, to get into this, I don't think Ian McKellen was a very good Gandalf. I'll get that out of the way. I'll start at the top. His Gandalf, oh my gosh, he is overacting. I've seen Sir Ian McKellen in a lot of other movies because I'm a big fanboy of his. I've seen him in Richard III. I've seen him in the Da Vinci Code. I've seen him in the X-Men movies. He's always perfect. He's perfect. Typically in anti-heroic and villainous roles. This might sound weird, but he was born to play Saruman, in my opinion. No one could play Saruman like him. And it might sound weird, but I think Christopher Lee was born to play Gandalf. And the Tolkien had selected Christopher Lee for the role. Peter Jackson in the studio went, no, we'll give you Saruman and then we'll basically edit you out of the theatrical edition. And then we'll put you in the expanded edition. Christopher Lee is a proven actor. He's played both heroic and villainous roles in his time with Hammer. He's one of the greatest actors. He should have been Gandalf. And I know a lot of people won't agree. Oh, well, he's got that perfect villain voice. Yeah, he does. The thing about Gandalf is he has a powerful voice as well. Gandalf is a remarkably charismatic, beautiful individual, and Christopher Lee should have played the character. Now, I know some people say, well, he's too old. Come on, he did some of the footwork in Star Wars Episode 2. He was, you know what? He was able to do it at the same time period. I don't see why that's a problem. I just think that Ian McKellen, for example, is perfect at playing fanatics and even characters who do small moral compromises at a time they become villains, to go from anti-hero to villains. And he always gives them an air of tragedy and just steely will. I love that about McKellen. So he would have been perfect as Saruman. And Christopher Lee, when he plays a hero, he lends an air of simple decency. Now we get to other roles. Weirdly, I think Elijah Wood should have played Wormtongue. I've seen Elijah Wood play villains. He's always perfect as a villain. Wood should not have been cast as Frodo. Now, he looks the part, but the problem is his Frodo is too fragile. Weathertop, for example, where Frodo stumbles and utterly fails, and every turn of the way, the movies make a point of showing how Frodo is weak, basically barely 2 steps above what Gollum has become, what with his rapid instant addiction to the ring, which strikes me as very weird thematically. Frodo is too fragile, and I do think that some of the blame lies with Elijah Wood, and he should have probably imbued the role with a bit more strength. That said, he is not the most glaring problem with the hobbits. Merry and Pippin are right over there next to him. It's the same character. It's just a single blob that could separate itself in 2. This is how Jackson and his screenplay writers perceive the 2 characters. Gone is the strength and courage and wisdom of Merry and the vulnerability and naivete of Pippin. The 2 characters are polar opposites. One is more like Noel from the Jeanne d'Arc novel of Mark Twain, Paladin from the same novel, because Tolkien was taking those 2 characters and introducing them into fantasy. He was taking 2 historic fiction, my good friend Sam pointed out in our History Book Club podcast over on the History Corner. I just think that these marked characteristics are totally forgotten, shunted aside, just for cheap comedy. Pains me to hear those who haven't read the book yet say, Merry and Pippin, oh, you mean the 2 fools. They should never have been in the story. But in the book, they're such crucial, great characters. But in the movie, they're just eating up time needlessly. I don't like what was done with them. For perfect casting, you have Samwise. No one could complain about that casting. Theoden is perfectly cast. That actor I know from Hercules' Legendary Journeys, he's so good. Weirdly, I'm of the opinion that maybe the actor for Denethor should have played Elrond. The actor who played Elrond should have played Denethor because he seems to be glaring and whining and seems like he wants to just shove a sword through Aragorn's guts. Honestly, he just seems to look at Aragorn with nothing but hatred in his eyes. I can't quite understand this directional decision. Okay, so he's a disapproving dad. Like, I can't believe my daughter's dating. But that's not Elrond at all. Elrond is warm and wise, essentially looks on Aragorn like his son. Time for Sean Bean and Viggo Mortensen. I'm a big fan of both actors. However, the problem is Viggo Mortensen, while a great actor, just watch the movie of Carl Jung, he's perfect as Sigmund Freud. He steals the show, really. Almost every movie, he steals the show. In Lord of the Rings, he's so asleep. He's phoning it in. Now, I've seen dozens of his movies, and I'm going, yeah, he's not trying. He's clearly going on autopilot and snoring through his lines. And that just confuses me. In turn, Sean Bean is pouring his heart and soul into every line. Sean Bean, at his core, is more charismatic than Viggo Mortensen. And the trouble with that is that essentially your eyes are not being drawn to Aragorn, but to Boromir. Because Boromir seems more kingly than Aragorn in the movies. And the reason this is a problem is that Aragorn should not be upstaged by Boromir. Boromir is supposed to be the lesser, slightly envious character to an extent. And I do like Boromir, he's heroic. But I kind of think that the roles should have been reversed. Sean Bean should have played Aragorn because he had the strength, the physicality, the charisma, the conviction, and he can play wise characters like that, while Viggo Mortensen is better at anti-heroes. So to shove him into a Boy Scout role is not a good idea, I think. And so you have a villain actor and an anti-hero actor playing essentially a Superman type character, or King Arthur. If you disagree with me, that's fine. Now to get to the actual lore stuff. Now I am planning an entire playlist where I'll go through every shot of these films and point out what's inaccurate, whether that's a positive or negative, as I do think that one should have a nuanced view here. Because there are some decisions that were wisely made. I don't think replacing Glorfindel with Arwen was a good idea, if only because what Peter Jackson ended up deciding to do was, originally he wanted Arwen to show up for a longer role as a warrior character. Then he went into the other extreme where he turned her into an overly vulnerable damsel whom is swooning and apparently struggling because her fate is tied with Middle-earth's. That doesn't make any sense. The trouble is, she went from wielding a sword in the first movie to being utterly vulnerable to the point of silliness in even the second movie, so that it's just incomprehensible. That brings me to, for example, one scene in the second movie where Elrond's going, you know what, why would you even want Aragorn? You're going to outlive him by thousands of years. Ignoring the fact that if she chooses Aragorn, she's choosing the fate of having a lifespan kind of like a normal human woman, and ignoring the fact that Elrond was actually kind of supportive of Aragorn marrying his daughter, but he had as condition, you know, you must become king. Elrond really tried to help Aragorn as much as he could. This is basically Elrond in the movies saying, all right, if you become king, you can marry my daughter, but I'm going to renege on my end of the deal and try to get her out of Middle-earth and to cross over into Valinor. So, oh well, sorry Aragorn, if he should succeed. Elrond loses all sympathy as a character, and it's not referenced, it's not commented later, so that I wonder if it's in continuity within the movie. It's things like this. Plot points are brought up and dropped. They're not Tolkien's, they're Jackson's, and I'm just left confused. It's conscious decisions like this as a storyteller that it's like, what are you doing? You also have decisions like, for example, making Gimli also a comedic character, which is perplexing and frustrating. If only Gimli was treated with respect and decency, because he's supposed to be a chivalric knight. He is actually the chivalric knight archetype, and yet he is turned into the bumbling sidekick who's essentially one big fart joke. This really angers me because I grew up on Le Geste Roland and knightly chivalric stories, and so to see one of my favorite kind of type of character reduced to such a state, as well as the fact that honestly when I first read Lord of the Rings, I really liked Gimli. He was my favorite character on my first reading, and to see him reduced to such a state of buffoonery, it breaks my heart. So like I said, I'm going to be going scene by scene and dissecting the movies, not simply hating. I will praise some things because there is stuff to praise, and I think the stuff that I like about the movies, I don't think many people take notice of, but on the other hand, things I don't like, not many people seem to comment on. And for example, the you shall not pass. No, it's you cannot pass. Not Gandalf stating a fact that the Balrog will not pass. It's Gandalf being desperate and saying, I can't let him pass. And I find the overacting of Ian McKellen just jarring, so that it always took me out of the movie. If you like the acting in that scene, that's fine. Like it, love it, don't listen to me. But I just find Sir Ian McKellen, who, for example, in the Da Vinci Code, steals every scene, and it's so magnificent and charismatic, here just weird. I know a lot of fans don't like to be reminded of this, but bear in mind, 20 years ago, the first thought of Peter Jackson was to have a revived Sauron versus Aragorn fight. And this sort of thing shows that didn't really understand the story. To him, he perceived the story as an action-adventure story in the mold of maybe something like Top Gun or Die Hard, Predator. While he does get some of the horror stuff right, but the trouble is that he took a Celtic, Gaelic, Nordic, Anglo-Saxon epic poem, so to speak, and turned it into a popcorn flick. And this is utterly distressing. I guess my views are akin to with the likes of Christopher and Tolkien. There was so little done right, and I think that Tolkien himself would have been horrified to see these movies. I think that a lot of people will disagree with me, and that's fine. And I hope I don't lose too many subs over this video. But to get back to the weird changes to the lore, which who knows what was on their mind, like with the Arwen thing. First, we're make her a major character. Oh, well, fans didn't like that. I guess we just gotta make her overly damsel. Her health is failing because Middle-earth is in danger. And now, what? Why would Aragorn even like her if she's that fragile? And as far as scenes go, there's one major scene that's missing that I really like that exemplifies why I don't like these movies. On the other hand, there's another scene which, my favorite scene in Lord of the Rings, or one of them, and it does a great job with it. I really don't like these movies, though they'd probably be more Return of the King. One of them is the fact that we don't get to see Sam be tempted by the ring. And I really would have liked it because that scene is important. It is one of the most important in the story. During the scene, he is fed visions of himself, a great warrior, and goes, no, that's not what I want, and rejects the ring. This is a beautiful, beautiful scene showing the greatness of Samwise. And of course, there's the Theoden, Riders of Theoden. I can't stand that the BBC Radio 1 drama and other adaptations mostly couldn't get this scene right. But on the other hand, what I love is that Jackson got it right. You know, he put enough care enough to say, let's get this right. And Theoden's actor, of course, knocks it out of the ballpark, recites that great Riders of Theoden poem perfectly. I love that. Just so that we end on something of a positive note, this is my favorite scene. Well, alongside the slaying of the Witch King, which they did a good job with. Although I would have liked them to actually bring in the entire speech Eowyn gives, but I understand why they did. But that said, Witch King looks great, sounds great. The only thing is the staff breaking of Gandalf is weird. Dan and I are going to do a playlist where we're going to get into what's accurate, what isn't. And as an aside, this video is dedicated to a long-standing sub of this channel, Batshine, who suggested the idea for this video and the playlist going to be making. So huge shout out and thank you to him. I hope I didn't anger too many people and that I still have a few subs and didn't lose too many. But if you enjoyed this video, and even if you didn't, do feel free to smash that like and that subscribe button as though you were Sauron trying to smash Gil-galad into itty-bitty pieces.